Hello and welcome to the Digital Inclusion Exchange and our special Spread the Tech series in partnership with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and Digital Charlotte, an initiative of the Knight School of Communication at Queen's University of Charlotte. Our hosts today are Angela Seifer of NDIA, Andrew Au of Digital Charlotte, and I'm Bruce Clark, also with Digital Charlotte. During this hour interview, we'll discuss how the Enterprise Center has adjusted and risen to the challenges brought on by COVID-19, focusing on strategies of working in partnership with other organizations. It's our hope that today's conversation will allow others to learn from and replicate some of the strategies we're super excited to hear about today.
Our guest today is Jeff Milner. He's the Digital Equity Officer for the Enterprise Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Jeff is the guy NDIA calls often to say, what are you doing? What are you doing about this? What are you doing about that? What can we learn? What can we teach somebody else? What are the lessons? What did you do wrong that you're willing to share with others? And he does. Jeff's that guy. So Chattanooga has been the leader in digital equity for a long time, and a lot of that has to do with Jeff. So Jeff, we're excited to have you with us. We're going to get started with the question that is a common question, a common discussion right now in the NDIA community, which is how are you adjusting your digital inclusion work during our social distancing pandemic era?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that is an absurd introduction, and I appreciate it. Everything we do here is in partnership. I'm a guy who probably talks a little too much, but we're really excited to be able to work with NDIA on so many of these to get so much information from the national level, the best practices, being part of a community of practice, and access to so many experts is huge to the work that we do on the ground. And it's really exciting to be talking with a peer city like Charlotte as well. I hope it's okay calling you guys a peer city. I know you're a little bigger, but you know,
we'll edit that out later. Don't worry.
Well, so in terms of how we're adjusting, you know, it's this, to sum it up, you know, the last 5 years of work and the next 10 years of work shrunk down into about an 8-week time frame. How is that possible? And we know this is a bit of you can't solve the digital divide in 3 weeks, 8 weeks, but the degree to which we have been able to make progress, because I think in part due to this shared experience of what the digital divide is when everybody is remote, some of that sort of understanding of what it was like for our disconnected residents and neighbors, that's something we're all feeling at the moment, and has made moving forward things that were in process, you know, a lot easier. At the same time, we've just had to move faster. When a school system closes over the course of a week or weekend, and a number of students are potentially not going to be able to connect to the lessons and teachers and resources that they need, we've got to move faster. And that's been a big piece of it as well.
What are some of those things that you've had to move faster? I mean, anything you could share with us, and how you were able to move it faster in this moment?
One of them has been a project we've been working on for a little while. Chattanooga is a smart city. We do a lot around smart city investment and technology. We were looking at public Wi-Fi, for example, and I know there's a lot of conversation about parking lot Wi-Fi and things like that right now around the country. We had been looking at, you know, with the backhaul that we have, with a partner like the city, with a partner like EPB, our electric power board, who's our ISP, with our neighborhood level partners who are running programs like Tech Goes Home with us. What could public Wi-Fi look like at a neighborhood level, instead of maybe just downtown, but out in some of the places where folks live in lower income areas? And we've been laying the groundwork for a pilot in this space, kind of picking an area, standing up a handful of APs alongside the city's existing network, working with some researchers on the sociologist Chandra Ward Dr. Chandra Ward at UTC, saying, what could the impact be? That turned into 120 plus APs deployed across the city in the span of a week. A couple of years to standing this up, to suddenly a citywide and countywide deployment of public Wi-Fi locations. And we hope the places that people are going to be close to where they live, walking distance of their homes, for some access on their porches. It's ongoing work. I think we've stood up now close to 75 of those spots at this point.
And that's all outdoor access, right, Jeff? That's not in the home. It's parking lot or front porch.
Or front porch. We hope, and EPB done a great job here. We've also worked with our housing authority to do some in much denser areas, and we hope we're getting a little bit of kind of front room access. We know it is not the only solution, but it is one of the things that we could do very quickly. And partners like EPB, like our school system, like some philanthropic partners in the city, just jumped to do right away because it was something that we had quick control over.
And who's doing that physical labor? Who's going out and setting that up?
That's a combination. So on the actual deployment side, it is of course EPB.
Okay.
But our partners at the school system are hanging the signs, are speaking with folks in the neighborhoods. We're working with churches, the schools where they exist, Boys and Girls Club are a couple of other locations where food drops were happening, in these places where we expected people to be spending a lot of time or visiting regularly. So a real network doing the important human side of it's not just standing this stuff up. If it exists but nobody's using it, that requires communication, it requires trust, it requires relationships. And the school system certainly, Grant Knowles with them has been hugely helpful.
So that's the public access side of the equation. Where we all want to ultimately get is the internet in the home. So can you talk about your activities to get that happening?
Yeah, and again, all in partnership.
Yeah.
One of the things, and part of this was thanks to NDIA, so full credit, the power of the network. We heard from Salt Lake City that they had worked with Comcast to qualify their whole district. We know that signing up for internet can be the barrier itself. The forms you need, the identification, all these kinds of things can be that one little barrier that ends up meaning no access in a home. When we saw Salt Lake had done it, we called our local government rep and asked, is this possible? And within 24 hours, our district was qualified. They were incredible to work with. At the same time, our local solution, EPB, figured out who they could deploy to very quickly to provide that same level of service. And again, it's in a situation like this, it's not kind of picking a solution. It's working with everybody because there's no best fit. There's a best fit for an individual, and making sure that they've got what they need to get that connection has been huge.
So it is more the all solutions on the table, all hands on deck. Can you talk a bit about that, the working with the partners? How much of that has been folks coming to you? How much of it has been you reaching out to folks? I guess the question is, how is that different today than it was 3 months ago?
Right. Well, so one of the things that the Enterprise Center does, and through our program Tech Goes Home, is we organize our local kind of digital equity and inclusion committee, meet monthly, number of different partners who have some form of digital equity inclusion focus, from our city to our public library to a number of nonprofits like La Paz, who's got a strong foothold in our Latinx community, to signal centers who work disability services, accessible technology, our Office of Early Learning. We know this is really important for our early childhood educators. Yeah. So a core group, I'm not naming everybody, but who meets pretty regularly to talk about what's going on in their organizations, projects, plans, long-term planning especially. How do we do this as a collaborative? So we had a little bit of that structure to start with. Frankly, from and Chattanooga is a very connected city. It's a very networked city, both, literally physical infrastructure, and just, it's the South. We're a connected place. Our United Way stood up immediately a community call as closing started. 150 different organizations on those calls in the first few weeks, just sharing what was going on, challenges. And as that sort of started to separate out into specific working and focus groups, we became one of the natural leads around digital access. Our other partner in that space, and this has been one of the ways that it's really changed. Tech Goes Home and the Enterprise Center has had a very strong Chattanooga and Hamilton County focus. That's where a lot of our programming is. But we know our region, we have an impact on each other.
Right.
So the Thrive Regional Partnership is a nonprofit headquartered in Chattanooga, but that works over a 16 county region in Northeast Alabama, North Georgia, and Southeast, headed up East Tennessee. And a couple of other partners like Signal Centers has a much larger footprint than we do in their disability services work around the Southeast. So we've got a handful of these regional partners, and it's been bringing those together. This is not just our challenge. It's a challenge for Grundy County and Ray County and Catoosa County, and just
everybody.
It's everybody.
Yeah.
And it, again, this sort of idea of like, there definitely isn't one solution that works for downtown Chattanooga and also works, 100 miles away from downtown Chattanooga in rural Appalachia. So that was a big change, is how kind of differentiated the work has become, and our regional focus on making sure that everybody's getting what resources we can provide, and that every voice is part of this, not just emergency response, but how do we take this emergency response and solve a challenge that definitely existed before this happened. And I know you all know that this is, it has highlighted the disparity. It has brought attention to it. And as I said earlier, I think a different level of shared experience around it, but it is by no means new, and it is not going away unless we keep working on it, and galvanizing this moment to take advantage of that feels hugely important.
So speaking of working on it and kind of focusing in perhaps on the digital literacy skill training piece, so who is doing the digital literacy work now, and how is that different from the pre-COVID, so to speak?
Yeah.
Or BC for before COVID and AC for after COVID.
After COVID.
Yeah.
Mid-COVID is where we are.
Yeah. We're MC now, yeah.
Or just COVID. Sorry, this is again, edit and post, please.
We're live, buddy.
So beforehand, one of the biggest players in this space was the Enterprise Center and Tech Goes Home. The Tech Goes Home model started in Boston by our current executive, Deb Sosha. We're really excited that she's in Chattanooga. And we've been running that program for about 5 years. For those who don't know, basic principles, 15 hours of digital literacy training, a brand new device at a subsidized cost, about $50 for a Chromebook or tablet. Less to subsidize the cost, and more that we know, putting a little skin in the game really helps people follow through and see value in the program. And then that connection to low-cost home internet at the end of it. And that's something that we've run with about 90 different partners around Hamilton County at this point. And so it is, it's a platform. It's not about, we're not the only digital equity and inclusion organization in Chattanooga. There are at least 90. It's part of everybody's work. It's foundational, it's infrastructure level, it's systems. How can it better support what these frontline organizations are doing? So, but that's an in-person class, and that's something that has absolutely had to change. We had a couple of classes running as things shut down that actually were able to finish up, taking advantage of this platform of Zoom to run through the ends of our classes. We're working with a handful of our trainers and some of those organizations at the moment to figure out what this looks like in a period of social distancing and where you can't get everybody into a space. We're running a couple pilots of that in May, both on kind of remote workforce development and our regular kind of first time hopping into this world kinds of class, which we're really excited and a little nervous
Sure.
to pilot. But we know that's part of the process. There are going to be some hurdles, but the stakes are pretty high. So we're going to make sure we get through them.
One thing that we realized too is, we started off our training, and I think now going forward, having the earn device, as we would call them, the device that the community member is going to earn, or have a subsidized cost to, is ensuring that the video conferencing software is like everything's already loaded on the computer when you start week one, so that should something happen and you have to give them out, that it's even just bookmarking an open Zoom room that makes a one click so community members can join, assuming they're connected to the internet. But I think, Andrew, you had a question on some of the online stuff.
I mean, this might be a little bit detailed for some, but for me, it's exactly my sweet spot, which is you've mentioned that you kind of handled running and finishing up classes on Zoom. What was the procedure for that? Like, from an operational logistics standpoint, like, what did you need to do, or what did you do to ensure that people were able to continue their learning?
Yeah, and so this is one of these moments in which I'm going to end up taking credit for other people's very hard work. Right, we work with these partner organizations. Velvet, who's one of our trainers, was working with La Paz class. So this, actually the very first one to finish up completely remotely, was also done entirely in Spanish. And so she said what was really important was sort of setting up some norms. Here is, make sure everybody has their names on there, because we're going to make sure nobody accidentally shows up in this class, and I'm going to let you in and out. She was calling everybody, walking them through the process to get them through the first time. And after setting up some of the, really hands-on with everybody to say, this is how we're going to do this, that it really rolled forward. And one of the things that's so exciting to me, and that I fundamentally believe about this work, is, this thing that we're talking over at the moment provides a very real connection. That this is a way to develop relationships, to build relationships in community. And hearing her talk about, the last class of Our Tech Goes Home is usually the presentations and celebration, and that they were able to all do their presentations, celebrate each other, and have that kind of moment at the end, is what tells me it's working. That's exactly what we're talking about, whether it's in person or done remotely. And it was just a really, really exciting thing to hear.
That's a really fabulous example. Can I ask you, Jeff, you and I talk a lot, have talked a lot about how the digital inclusion work overlaps with smart city work. And we have struggled, NDIA has struggled, and I think some of the practitioners have struggled with how to actually say it, right? Like, feel like you're doing it, but then explaining it to folks who are in different places can be kind of hard. So do you think that work has changed? In particular, I'm curious if some of the partners in the smart city world, I'm seeing from where I'm sitting, partners in the smart city world who all of a sudden understand the digital inclusion side of it like they didn't before. Are you experiencing that? Are you experiencing more folks wanting, like, oh, okay, this is important, let's do something together? Or am I just making that up?
No, I think that's it. And one of the things that I know we've talked about, but to me, digital inclusion is in some ways the education sector of smart cities. If you're talking about smart cities and education, you're talking about digital equity and inclusion. You're talking about digital literacy. The goals, I think, of both of these things are the same, which is a city more efficient, more effective, more equitable than it was before. And participation is a huge part of that. If citizens can't participate, you're not getting the outcomes, you're not getting what you want out of this smart city work. And so you really can't do one without the other.
Right.
I think that's, to me, it changed. I'll go back to it. I think this is suddenly that shared understanding piece.
Okay.
Is, yes, that we get what you're saying, Jeff, or you're saying other digital equity inclusion advocate. But we've got to put these infrastructure in place. We've got to figure out
Right.
these systems. There's all this stuff we've got to do first. And then realizing to get the feedback, to understand whether or not it's working, requires that participation. And this moment of everybody being remote, of not having, I don't know, just not having that level of engagement because everybody's in their homes, you recognize how connected those two things are.
Mm-hmm. And recognize how many people aren't connected, right? I mean, that's,
Exactly.
I think the piece that you said at the top is, you know, people like us all understand that, but the folks who may be doing some smart cities piece and view it in a very technical way are now seeing in a way that's different than you or I or Angela or somebody talking to them directly, is they're seeing it on the news every day. They're seeing it in the headlines of national and local publications every day about the challenges of the digital divide.
It's what, you know, you're seeing it in the data as well. I mean, if you're looking at traffic things that are watching, where people are walking, what they're using, it's giving you that same information. There is no participation when a city shut down.
Do you think that has your experience been that awareness is also bringing in new financial resources from areas? Like, we know the federal government is doing a little bit, not as much as we all would like, but hopefully there's more coming. Doing some, there are some pots of money that are specifically focused on connectivity. Hopefully there's be more around digital literacy. Are you seeing that locally? Are there partners coming in that previously hadn't been for financial reasons?
You know, I'm not going to say that there are partners who are coming in who wouldn't have come in. I had a conversation with my partner, Rep Bentley at Thrive, who's been doing this regional work. She's like, I'm looking for funding for this stuff, and I'm having a hard time coming up with it. Like, I found some infrastructure funding, but I can't find like something for digital literacy, like other than what IMLS has made available to the states at the moment. Like, that's what's there.
So that's what I'm seeing. That's actually what I'm seeing. I am seeing more, because I think the awareness around devices in the home, connectivity in the home, which is pretty fascinating, because that's been kind of hard in the past. Like, nobody was like, oh, we don't pay for computers.
Yeah.
So now people are like, yeah, I want to pay for a computer. So that is different. And I wonder if it is in part that there's been so much awareness around the school kids not having access.
Mm-hmm.
Even
That
though it
definitely
goes way
helps.
beyond school kids.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, that's kind of a limitation. But the positive side of all that media and folks talking to each other about it is there do seem to be more resources for that now.
And that's the local piece, has been folks who have been engaged in our work and supporters of our work are coming to us saying, what else do you need? What else can we do? Who else can be part of this conversation? And that's also a little bit of, as I was having this conversation about what funding is out there, is that weird balance of, you know, there aren't always, or very rarely are there kind of specific digital equity focused funds to go after. But our work has such an impact across the board. There are really creative and partner driven ways to work with older adults, to work with schools, to work with speakers of other languages. This is work that can fit in so many other places. And because there are more funds at the moment directed towards that, there are a lot of opportunities to get this work and the foundational pieces to another level beyond where they were, and outside of just schools. I call attention to older adults in particular, right? This is a challenge
certainly.
at a much higher degree. When you,
for them, it's life and death,
right?
It is life and death. I have never
absolutely
explained the digital divide work before as life and death, and I do today. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I mean, thinking about the conversations that we've had earlier too, and you know, just coming back to one thing that I was hearing both of you say, Angela and Jeff, and thinking about I've seen the same thing, as the willingness to fund some of the hardware and technology, and perhaps even the access, as we saw in our conversation earlier around some of the COVID-19 telehealth FCC funds and things like that are unique and new. You know, but they seem to me that they are, it's easy to spend money on a device that's a single time I spend it and give it to somebody and they can get that device. But the harder piece is the training and to the digital literacy training that's happening. And so, I think I can fund a cohort of people, but that's like over time. And what does that look like now in this virtual way? And, when it's still really, really needed. So I don't think there's no question on the end of that, but just seeing how we might be seeing funding going to things that it hadn't been going to, but there's still gaps at the end. I think we're talking about that too at the federal level as well.
Jeff, are you all having conversations about how you see this progressing post-COVID? The awareness increase that we have now. What do you think? Thoughts on what that might look like post-COVID?
Yeah, and I'll something that we talked about on our digital access call a couple days ago, right, is for those folks who signed up for 2 months free which is incredible, and I'm not negating that in any way. It's
certainly
been life and death. It's a lifesaver.
Yeah.
But when those 2 months end, what's the next thing? This work is always sort of, we've got our emergency response moment. How does that not just solve our immediate challenges, but help lead towards, how does it look like infrastructure? How does it look like systems? How does it look like deeper integration? And one of those things has been the sudden, and again, this is not to criticize any other organization, but the sudden expansion of advocacy,
right,
across who, again, it wasn't their primary concern,
yes,
but recognizing that it's part of their mission-driven, primary focus is being able to reach the folks they work with. Suddenly, connectivity is a bigger part of that, and getting that from not just one sector, not just education, or not just folks like us who are even hyper connected to the work of digital equity inclusion itself, but kind of, you've got a much broader coalition, a much broader, frankly, range of narrative, of examples to point to of how this impacts these different parts of our society, our cities, our communities, our neighborhoods. And that's something to build off of as well. In addition to, so I use the public Wi-Fi example, right? This is, as we look about how to deploy that, how is that, kind of future ready infrastructure? How are we not just standing it up in parking lots to serve a temporary need, but are we looking at neighborhoods, housing authorities, places where we know folks have been disconnected, and set that up for part of the, underlying infrastructure for all of this work moving forward, as we figure out home access, that we've still got this thing that we can lean on, and folks understand and are using. So
you talked about,
to me is part of the arc. Sorry.
You talked about those new partners and how they're coming from different segments. Are you seeing this a concentration of people from? Are you saying, wow, I'm talking to a lot of healthcare providers, or are you seeing something in particular that is happening in Chattanooga? Or
pointing to health that is definitely one, and particularly around older adults. Had a fantastic conversation with our partners at Aleo Health, but Hospice of Chattanooga earlier today. And what does palliative care look like in a telehealth and remote environment? That this is life and death, and it's also about dignity of life. And that's something that is maybe a little more subtle, but really important in a situation like this, where you have, folks saying things like, well, if you've made it that far, it's time to start opening up. They're doing fabulous work looking after folks that, again, dignity of life is being preserved
it's also
because of telehealth.
Jeff, isn't it also connected to the social distancing, and those residents not being able to spend time with their loved ones? I mean, or are they I don't even know.
Right. On the health side, the social isolation, is a huge, and that's the conversations we're having with So we've got a great partner, many great partners at our university, UTC. But Christy Wick, who's the chair of gerontology at the School of Nursing, this has been one of the things that we've been working on, and she's figuring out what can we do to create connective experiences in our centers for care, in senior living communities, in places where folks have been particularly isolated and where it is having an impact on health and mental health
Right.
in a way we haven't experienced before. So a great example. I think other places that we're getting more advocates are some of the organizations that either serve broad regions or specific demographics, or who have been concerned with employment, or with food, or with shelter, or with, and again, the nature of communicating with the folks that they work with means they've got a different reliance on connectivity than they had before, and are suddenly like, a hotspot to go out and do surveys makes a huge amount of difference, or that you can leave with somebody who needs to stay in touch with you. It's the kitchen sink approach, right? It's all these different things for different orgs, but it's a really, really wide array who are.
And I think we're seeing that nationally too. Like, we're seeing that locally. I think we're also seeing it nationally, where organizations that haven't done work around in the digital equity field, because it impacts their mission. And that's always been true amongst some that got it early. And now it is so intense that everyone is getting it. So I'm fascinated by where this goes post-COVID. If we are able to, it's the crisis, right? The crisis has caused us to make gains that we hadn't made. We have gotten internet into more homes. There are more devices in more homes than before. The digital literacy is a separate problem, but those two things are happening because of the crisis. Can we maintain that post-crisis is the question.
Yeah.
Well, if this crisis lasts, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Bruce.
If this crisis lasts as long as we think, we might have a lot of tailwinds to keep us going forward.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No.
I just feel like I should explain all the honking. I keep trying to mute, but it's kind of a fun story. The child across the street, his birthday's today, so his family and friends are driving around the block and honking. So
I've actually threatened to do exactly this to my wife.
It's quite fabulous, actually.
That's why I'm locked in the back bedroom, but it's not what she wants, it turns out. So I was going to say, I think to your question, what does the new normal look like is a really big question that we don't have a ton of answers for. But the trend of life in general has been one increasingly lived, at least partially online, of rapidly evolving technology. These were already trends. We've had this sudden moment, but I think what we're doing to the solutions for both of those are also moving in the same direction. And I hope that's something we're going to be able to build off of as well.
What would you say we talked a little bit about coalitions and how there's an increasing number of partners coming into coalitions, but I'm curious what your suggestions would be, putting you on the spot here, but for other coalitions across the country, like what were some things that you guys have done recently that you think have worked really well I think there's a kind of how do you bring new partners in, not to drive your answer in a specific way, but more broadly, like what advice would you give to other digital equity or digital inclusion coalitions across the country?
Yeah. One of the things to give it a little bit of a backdrop, I think because, Chattanooga has an institution like the Enterprise Center and like Tech Goes Home, the way Charlotte has Digital Charlotte and some of your partners, the fact that there was a place to go for information, that was huge for us. There was a natural way for those folks looking for answers because we had a much broader community meeting around all of the issues, they were able to find us. One of the things that we did, right, we're not exactly a direct service organization. We are working with these partners. Our immediate focus was, what could we develop for organizations? What are the back end kind of things that will support them? Not necessarily like, here's how you run Tech Goes Home, but how do you access information about low cost internet or free internet? Those were big questions we got from a ton of organizations at the beginning. Like, hey, we work with school kids. They're going home now. We have close touch with them. What can we give them at the moment? And it was reaching out to organizations through, for us, it was the United Way and some of our other partners who had a number who worked in circles that we didn't, saying, here is something that they can run with. Here is valuable information on, how to get folks connected, where devices are available, what our libraries are doing, what online classes and things like that exist. For our rural communities, here's the information on, bus Wi-Fi. We work with UTC to put up maps of our public Wi-Fi of food drop locations. It was just doing a lot of the back end work and reaching out through partners who had different connections and saying, hey, if you've got someone who needs this, please, take this, run with it, open source, all that. I know that was a big work of Charlotte as well, getting together where all of the providers and what they were offering around the country. That was hugely helpful to us. But it was this, what could we do to help? Let's start doing that now and start pushing it out as quickly as possible.
So I really suspect, and maybe some researcher will come along and do this post-COVID. I suspect places that had strong digital inclusion ecosystems, as Chattanooga does and as Charlotte does, were more prepared for this crisis than others. Happy birthday, Max.
They're agreeing with your statement.
Happy birthday, Max.
But because those partners are talking to each other, and there's enough of them that when an entity that wasn't involved in the digital inclusion ecosystem realizes there's a situation and they want to help or they need help, they could find somebody who knew somebody else to get the answers. And in some communities, that doesn't exist.
That's absolutely true.
It would be interesting to see, though, is it also helping form coalitions in places there wasn't, right? I mean, that's sort of the other thing is, and obviously, how, and maybe this is obviously a question for NDIA, but thinking about all the great resources that NDIA has created specifically for that, how we might we care about our community, but we also care about this issue more broadly. And so thinking about how do we as a community of practitioners and people who care about digital equity support other communities who are not, who don't have that coalition formed yet. Maybe there's something there too. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess in the short term, we welcome everyone to the NDIA community. Join on the listserv. Join the community, that gets you on the listserv. We have our Friday COVID calls. We got to rename those because that just. But that is what's happening now, is that sharing out, and we definitely have new affiliates because of the crisis.
Yeah, it's huge. This work is not a zero-sum game. It's not who solves it first. It's that we've got to solve this. And again, the community practitioners who, we reached out to as many of the folks that we've worked with about what are you doing at the moment, so that we could bring it back to our communities. And that has always been my experience working through NDIA and working in digital equity inclusion in general, is that everybody is happy to share, because solving the problem is why we're doing it. We're not just solving it for our own community.
That's exactly. Yes. That's a great note to end on.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
This has been an absolute pleasure. Good luck editing all the rambling.
Well, we'll do our best. But thank you for joining the Digital Inclusion Exchange and our special Spread the Tech series, a partnership between the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and Digital Charlotte, an initiative of the Knight School of Communication at Queen's University of Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.